The story begins with the Claire Phaeton gazed into the mirror, her reflection offering a stark reminder of the inadequacy she felt defined her existence compared to her radiant older sister. She scrutinized her own features, internalized the harsh criticisms that branded her as the princess lacking in charm, charisma, and the ladylike education expected of royalty. Her identity had been forged in the shadow of books rather than ballrooms, leaving her with the conviction that she possessed neither beauty nor the ability to smile convincingly. This self-deprecating assessment accompanied her as she faced her destiny as the second princess of the Phaeton Empire, a title she wore with a heavy sense of displacement. The geopolitical landscape had shifted violently, reshaping her life's trajectory as the empire of Phaeton fell to the kingdom of Valatinir in a war of independence. A map depicted the stark reality of the conflict, labeling Valatinir the victor and Phaeton the loser, a shift in power that demanded restitution. Claire found herself designated as a living war reparation, a human item of compensation sent to the victorious nation to solidify a peace treaty. The logic was cold but undeniable. By receiving a blood relative from their former superior, Valatinir demonstrated both internally and externally that they now stood on equal footing with the empire. Claire understood her role as a sacrificial pawn, rationalizing that if hostilities resumed, she would serve as a convenient hostage against her homeland. This fate stood in stark contrast to the modest future she had envisioned for herself, one where she might have married a bureaucrat and found quiet work within the administration. Instead, she sat confined within a carriage traversing the border, her father's indifference to her potential death as a dropout princess weighing heavily on her mind. She exhaled a weary breath, accepting that her position was less that of a hostage and more akin to a disposable sacrifice. As the carriage rolled toward the victorious kingdom, she lamented the meager contents of her luggage, wishing she had prioritized books over dresses and jewelry. Her escort interrupted her reverie, announcing their arrival at the border and the necessity to transfer vehicles. Claire confessed her longing for reading material, revealing that she had memorized the contents of the books in her home country, a mental library necessitated by the strict regulations she now faced. The grim reality of the border control manifested as a strict prohibition. No books were permitted entry into the kingdom of Valatinir. She acknowledged the impossibility of her situation, stepping out of the carriage to face the unknown reception that awaited a relative of the enemy. To her utter bewilderment, the carriage door swung open to reveal a young man beaming with an unexpected warmth. Prince Aglia Valatinir, the crown prince of the nation, welcomed her with a smile that shattered her expectations of hostility. He confessed that his impatience had driven him to intercept her arrival personally, a gesture that left Claire flustered by his handsome demeanor and genuine enthusiasm. He invited her into his carriage, his casual dominance sweeping aside her confusion as she struggled to reconcile his kindness with her status as a hostage. Inside the carriage, Aglia introduced himself formally as the man who would become her husband, confirming with a casual yep that she was destined to be the crown princess, not merely the wife of a second prince. Claire stammered, unable to process the elevation of her status, while Aglia apologized for his tardiness, introducing himself as Aglia Valatinir. He studied her with a keen interest, noting her celebrity status in his country, while Claire grappled with the cognitive dissonance of being welcomed rather than reviled. She harbored a dark suspicion that the next breach of peace would result in her execution, yet Aglia's demeanor suggested a complexity she had not anticipated. Aglia addressed the elephant in the room, acknowledging the unspoken agreement that governed their arrangement. He framed their relationship not as captor and captive, but as an opportunity to extract information from one another, proposing they start by simply getting to know each other. He assured her that the journey to the castle would take a few days, urging her to take her time adjusting to her new reality. Claire, overwhelmed by his consideration, offered a hesitant thank you, her voice trailing off in uncertainty. As the journey progressed, the carriage halted in a city for a rest stop. Claire surveyed the streets, noting the abundance of general stores but the glaring absence of libraries or bookstores. She probed Aglia about the availability of paper through trade, only to uncover the strategic deprivation inflicted upon his kingdom. Aglia explained that Valatinir lacked a paper manufacturing system, forcing them to rely on parchment and wood shavings. He revealed that the empire had deliberately excluded paper and ink from traded goods, designating them as prohibited items to stifle the dissemination of knowledge and keep the kingdom underdeveloped. Claire instantly recognized the tactical suppression of information, but her gaze shifted to the dense coniferous forests that lined the road. She connected the dots, realizing the raw materials for paper production were abundant within the kingdom itself. Aglia confirmed he had inspected the local stores and surmised that the technology to convert their timber into paper was the missing link. Claire's demeanor shifted from timid to passionate as she declared her love for books and her desire to document the oral traditions of Valatinir once paper became widely available. Realizing she might have spoken out of turn, Claire hurriedly apologized for overstepping her bounds, but Aglia denied any offense. He pressed her, asking if she possessed the knowledge to construct the necessary equipment and draft plans for paper manufacturing. Claire confirmed her expertise, causing Aglia to embrace her in a burst of jubilant energy. He extolled her value, realizing that with her knowledge of logging and manufacturing, they could bypass the Empire's embargo, boost literacy, and generate wealth for the royal court. He promised they would discuss the details at the castle, praising her as amazing while Claire blushed furiously at the sudden intimacy. The remainder of the journey blurred into a continuous conversation, with Aglia chatting incessantly while Claire showcased her knowledge of trade, grain, and Nezian silk. A lingering sense of social inadequacy plagued her as they dined, fearing her attitude compared unfavorably to her sister and that she was failing to stand up to a man properly. Yet, Aglia neither pouted nor expressed anger, his constant engagement suggesting he was the first person to truly look at her and listen. Their arrival at the castle marked a permanent transition, with Aglia declaring it her new country and home. Claire marveled at the lovely architecture but internally braced herself, convinced she was entering enemy territory where she would be a burden. She remained baffled by Aglia's pleasure in her company. Upon entering the grand foyer, a phalanx of servants bowed in unison, greeting them as Crown Prince and Crown Princess. Claire instinctively recoiled, asking if she wasn't supposed to be the hated woman from the enemy country. Aglia silenced her self-deprecation with a gentle, "I understand," signaling to the staff that she was overwhelmed and needed space. Aglia outlined the immediate schedule, granting her rest for the day before a banquet the following morning. He clarified they would occupy separate rooms until the wedding ceremony, a detail that flustered Claire as the reality of their marriage solidified. He escorted her to her chambers, where 3 handmaidens, Millie, Melissa, and Gwen, introduced themselves with warm smiles, eager to serve her. Aglia departed, instructing them to take care of her, leaving Claire to collapse onto a bed that felt impossibly soft. Lying in the comfort of her new room, she marveled at the politeness and care she had received, a stark contrast to the treatment she had endured in her own homeland. The morning sun heralded the day of the feast, and the maids descended upon Claire with cheerful efficiency. They selected a glamorous dress and applied bright cosmetics, showering her with compliments about her fair skin and figure. Claire stood frozen, unused to such praise, confessing she had never received so many compliments in her entire life. As they finished her preparations, she looked in the mirror, acknowledging that their efforts had improved her appearance despite her self-perceived bad posture. Turning to the maids, Claire thanked them individually by name, Melissa, Gwen, and Millie, expressing her gratitude and her desire for their continued care. The servants paused, touched and surprised that she had remembered their names from the previous day. Their dedication deepened, pledging to serve her with their whole hearts. Fortified by their support, Claire took a steadying breath, resolving to step forward and show her face to His Majesty the King and the gathered nobles, ready to begin her new life in this strange, welcoming land. The banquet hall erupts with an atmosphere of refined tension as the King of Valatinier, a man of imposing stature with a thick mustache and a crown resting upon his brow, addresses the newly arrived guest. He raises a champagne flute, the glass catching the light, and declares the commencement of a metaphorical battle between their nations. Across from him stands Claire, the second princess of the Phaeton Empire, her expression guarded and bead of sweat tracing her temple as she faces the ruler of what she considers an enemy country. The king's demeanor shifts instantly from regal intimidation to boisterous hospitality as he smiles broadly, thanking her for her presence. He lifts his glass high, calling for a toast to welcome Claire Dano, shattering the icy anticipation with a resounding cheer. Claire recoils slightly, her large eyes widening in sheer bewilderment at the sudden warmth. The king, noticing her confusion, addresses the elephant in the room regarding the previous night. He admits that offering greetings immediately after her long, exhausting journey would have been meaningless. He confesses to his own rudeness but suggests they dispense with formalities so she can sit and introduce herself properly. Claire, maintaining her royal composure despite the whiplash in tone, curtsies and apologizes for her own inability to greet him upon arrival. The king waves off her apology with a casual air, urging her to simply introduce herself. Regaining her footing, Claire attempts to restart the interaction formally. She confesses her lack of understanding regarding the enthusiastic welcome she has received, given her position. She introduces herself with dignity as Claire, the second princess of the Phaeton Empire. The response from the Valatinier court is immediate and overwhelming. The king and his assembly raise their glasses once more, shouting cheers to Crown Princess Claire, celebrating her arrival as if she were a returning hero rather than a political hostage. The narrative shifts to the underlying political reality as Claire contemplates her value. She acknowledges that she possesses what the kingdom of Valatinier desperately needs, knowledge. The king explains that while his country boasts independence, it suffers from a lack of reconstruction and future development. Their spies within the empire had long reported on Claire's intellectual prowess, marking her as a target not for her lineage, but for the living knowledge contained within her mind. Claire touches her chest, understanding now that their hospitality stems from a pragmatic desire to utilize her education for their national advancement. She rationalizes the situation, accepting that she is viewed as a human encyclopedia. However, the king interjects, his expression sharpening with a playful yet dangerous edge. He reveals that there was intense passion regarding her acquisition. He bluntly states that if the emperor had handed over anything other than Claire herself, mere books or scrolls, he would have made things difficult enough to force a switch. He laughs, admitting that while the knowledge is vital, there is another reason he wanted her specifically. A young man with striking red hair, standing beside the king, interrupts the conversation, suggesting they discuss the details later, his gaze fixed intently on Claire. The scene dissolves into the festivities of the banquet. The king commands everyone to enjoy the food and merriment, initiating a feast. Guests engage in lively conversation, wine flows freely, and the atmosphere is one of genuine celebration. Claire moves through the crowd, engaging with various nobles, though she worries internally that her formal demeanor might be dampening the mood of the raucous party. The banquet stretches on, occupying the entire day from morning until night. Seeking a moment of respite from the overwhelming social engagement, Claire retreats to a quiet balcony overlooking the dark ocean. The silence is broken by the young man from earlier, who approaches her with a gentle demeanor. He asks if she had fun, to which she politely responds in the affirmative. The young man comments on his brother, noting that he has half abandoned his royal status to serve as a knight commander, declaring he will definitely take that role. Claire, confused by the lineage implications, queries if there isn't another prince in Valentinier, as she hasn't seen one around. The young man smiles enigmatically, assuring her that she will meet the other prince soon, and suggests that perhaps he even came all the way out there just to meet her. As he speaks, the wind picks up, and he steps closer to shield her, advising her not to let the night wind chill her. Claire looks up at him, and a sudden flash of recognition strikes her. She observes his flaming red hair and eyes that burn like the setting sun. The image superimposes over a memory buried deep within her past, triggering a realization. The narrative transports back 4 years to the royal palace of the Phaeton Empire. A younger, smaller Claire sneaks through the opulent corridors, relieved to have escaped the tedious ballroom dancing. She seeks a quiet place to read a book at her leisure. Peering around a massive pillar, she asks if anyone is there. Instead of solitude, she finds a young boy with red hair, crouching on the floor, tears streaming down his face. Claire, displaying her characteristic bluntness even then, asks him why he is crying and notes she hasn't seen him around before. She deduces from the delegation present that day that he must be the Prince of Valentinier. The young boy, wiping his eyes, confirms his identity. He explains that he accompanied his father to plead with the king of Phaeton for a doctor. A mysterious disease has spread through his country, causing suffering and death, and they lack the medical expertise to stop it. However, his father refuses to listen to him, and the empire treats their engineers and scholars as mere knowledge commodities rather than people worthy of aid. He feels powerless and ignored. Claire, dropping to her knees to be at eye level with him, shifts immediately into an analytical mode. She asks him to describe the disease. The boy describes the terrifying symptoms. People suddenly cannot breathe and die, while others develop severe rashes or respiratory issues specifically when they eat. He notes that the problem escalated when they released a large stock of old wheat onto the market because it yielded more than rice, and due to a poor fish catch, the population began consuming significantly more wheat than usual. Claire processes this information instantly. She identifies the cause not as a contagion, but as a severe allergic reaction caused by the sudden, excessive consumption of a single food source, wheat, over a short period in a population not accustomed to it. She realizes the unbalanced diet is the culprit. Without hesitation, she opens her book and begins scribbling furiously on a piece of loose paper. The young prince watches her, confused. Claire suddenly commands him to take off his clothes. The boy flushes crimson, stammering in shock, but Claire demands he hurry. She is not interested in impropriety, she needs a hiding spot. She shoves the paper containing the medical advice and tips on handling the illness into his clothing. She explains that while the guards will search his luggage, they will not strip search a foreign prince. She tells him the paper feels rough, but he must bear it, take it back to his country, and use the knowledge to save his people. Claire then grabs his shoulders, her expression stern and wise beyond her years. She tells him that crying solves nothing. She instructs him that if he wants to be happy, he must get stronger. The boy, overwhelmed by her fierce aid and directness, agrees, wiping his tears. She urges him to hurry back to His Majesty before his disappearance arouses suspicion. As he turns to leave, the boy stops. He looks back at Claire with a newfound intensity. He declares that when he becomes happy and strong, he wants her to come and marry him. Claire, somewhat dismissively, agrees that if he can be happy from the bottom of his heart, he can come pick her up. The timeline snaps back to the present on the moonlit balcony. The realization settles over Claire. This handsome young man is the crying boy from 4 years ago. The prince confirms it, smiling gently. He explains that he couldn't speak of this openly earlier because imperial spies were present in disguise. He reveals that thanks to the knowledge regarding allergies she provided, they took measures, secured rice as a food source, and saved his country from the crisis. Claire, flushing with embarrassment, apologizes. She admits she doesn't remember conversations with people very well and questions if she really said something as bold as a marriage promise. The prince laughs, noting that her current reaction is a defeat for her lady's education, but he finds it charming. He steps closer, closing the distance between them. He tells her that she saved him, not just his country. With the ocean breeze swirling around them, the prince gazes at her with deep affection. He confesses that she has been his inspiration his whole life. He reiterates his proposal from years ago, asking her formally to marry him. He declares that he has learned to be happy from the bottom of his heart and has become stronger, fulfilling the conditions she set. He explains that in Valentinir, there are people who see him not just for his knowledge or utility, but for him, a quality he felt was completely absent in his home country. He acknowledges that he has nothing to offer but his own knowledge, but he has found people who need it. He takes her hands, looking into her eyes with unwavering sincerity. He frames her arrival not as a political transaction, but as a fulfillment of destiny. He smiles, a genuine, warm expression that melts Claire's defenses. He accepts her status as a hostage, or sacrifice, with a twist of irony, stating it is a good thing she came as a sacrifice, implying that her presence is the greatest gift she could have given him. The following morning, sunlight streams into a lavish bedroom where Claire sits up in bed, looking disheveled and nursing a headache. A cheerful maid with twin tails, presumably Melissa, enters with a tray, offering medicine. She informs Claire that the doctor diagnosed her with overeating and overdrinking from the previous night's festivities. The maid chatters happily, explaining the banquet culture of Valentinir. She notes that when there is a big event, banquets often last from morning until night. She details how even the guards are served drinks in shifts and that servants and maids are given the week off to enjoy the festivals in the city. Claire, holding a warm cup of medicine, listens to the maid's explanation of the country's vibrant, celebratory culture. The maid explains that the people are excited about the festivals that occur twice a year. Claire realizes the stark difference between the rigid, transactional nature of the empire and the joyous, community-focused spirit of Valentinir. She sips her medicine, her expression softening. She resolves that starting tomorrow, she will be of service to everyone. She decides that even if she lacks the traditional graces of a lady, she will dedicate herself to her bridal training in this new land. Claire has found her place in a foreign country, no longer a tool of knowledge, but a person embraced by a prince and his people. The morning sun filters through the ornate windows of the royal chambers, illuminating a scene of gentle industry. Maids flutter about the room, their hands busy with the delicate task of preparing the crown princess for the day. One maid, adjusting the ribbons of the princess's dress, inquires softly about her health, asking how she is feeling after her recent indisposition. Claire stands poised and serene, a soft smile gracing her lips as she addresses her attendants. She beams at them, her expression radiating genuine warmth as she assures them that she has fully recovered, crediting their diligent care for her return to health. The atmosphere in the room shifts from caretaking to purposeful preparation. The head maid announces the next phase of the morning routine, declaring that it is time to ready Claire for her audience at His Majesty's office. Claire's expression firms, a look of determination settling in her eyes as she prepares to face the duties of her new station. Moments later, Claire stands before King Aglia. The king, seated comfortably, greets her with a disarming lack of pretension. He waves away her attempts at stiff formality, urging her to relax. He instructs her to view him not as a distant monarch, but simply as a father-in-law, and his wife as her mother-in-law, fostering a sense of familial intimacy within the cold palace walls. Claire, still adjusting to this unexpected warmth, offers a polite, albeit slightly stiff, greeting once again. Aglia wastes no time in pivoting to the business at hand. He calls out to his aide, asking for Claire's schedule to be brought forward. Claire watches him, noting his generous spirit, though she keeps her thoughts guarded. The king lays out a grand strategic vision for her integration into the kingdom's governance. He explains that she is to inspect all the government departments. Following this audit, she will be responsible for establishing an entirely new department. He emphasizes the gravity of this role, describing it as a key position vital to the country, designed to fill the missing pieces in the nation's administrative structure. Claire listens intently, absorbing the weight of the responsibility. However, a flicker of uncertainty crosses her face. She hesitantly voices a confusion that has been plaguing her, admitting that she had anticipated undergoing traditional bride training rather than administrative labor. She trails off, unsure of her footing. Aglia nods, acknowledging her query but swiftly redirecting the course of her education. He declares that he will leave full authority in her hands, trusting her judgment implicitly. To ensure she is well supported in understanding the country's specific affairs, he proposes bringing in Lord Balk to supplement her knowledge. He adds, with a thoughtful expression, that the Lord would make a fine escort for her endeavors. Claire's mind races to categorize this new figure. She asks for clarification, wondering if the Lord he refers to is a noble. Aglia confirms this, but his demeanor shifts into a teasing register. He looks at Claire, his eyes twinkling with mischief, and asks if she has any concerns about the arrangement. Claire, interpreting this as a critique of her social performance, begins to list her insecurities. She worries about her etiquette, her conversational wit, and the nuances of her body language, fearing she falls short of the court's standards. Aglia interrupts her self-critique with a backhanded compliment that catches her off guard. He praises her as a wonderful woman but then slyly asks if she truly feels the need to work on her feminine qualities. The comment hangs in the air, causing Claire to freeze. She processes the gentle jab, resigning herself to the reality of the situation. She bows her head slightly, accepting her fate, and confirms she will proceed according to the schedule. Suddenly, the king's expression darkens, the playfulness vanishing in an instant. He leans forward, his gaze intense and serious. He issues a sharp, unexpected warning. Claire must not, under any circumstances, cheat on him with Lord Balk. Claire recoils, her eyes widening in sheer shock. The accusation is so absurd, so far removed from her reality, that she is momentarily struck dumb. She flails her hands in a frantic denial, stammering out a rapid-fire defense. She insists that she would never cheat, and furthermore, she deprecatingly argues that she is not the type of person Lord Balk would be attracted to in the first place. Aglia watches her panic, then clarifies his statement with a nonchalant observation. He notes that Balk is merely very good at his job, implying the warning was perhaps more about professional intimacy than romantic entanglement. Attempting to regain her composure, Claire steers the conversation toward the mysterious Lord Balk. She wonders aloud what kind of man he is. She speculates that perhaps she shares similarities with him. Aglia quickly dispels this notion. He describes Balk as unsociable and uncompromising, a man of rigid principles. He then leans in with a conspiratorial whisper, asking Claire to keep his candid assessment a secret. Claire departs the king's office and makes her way to Lord Balk's domain. She arrives at a heavy wooden door, bracing herself for the encounter. Upon entering, she is greeted not by a person, but by a landscape of paper. Stacks of documents tower like skyscrapers, covering every available surface. A voice calls out from behind the fortress of parchment, instructing her to enter. Lord Balk sits amidst the chaos, a man of sharp features and serious demeanor. He wears a monocle that catches the light as he looks up from his work. Claire greets him formally, addressing him as Lord Balk. Internally, she steels herself, resolving not to let her guard down before this unsociable man. She introduces herself as Claire, expressing her anticipation of working with him. Balk rises, offering a stiff but polite apology for not greeting her sooner. He introduces himself formally as Balk of Count Parton. Without wasting time on pleasantries, he gestures for her to follow, announcing that he will take her to the place where the civil servants work. As they walk, Claire thinks to herself that despite his reputation, she might get along with him better than expected. They traverse the corridors, Balk explaining the logistics of the administration. He informs her that the civilian workrooms are divided by department, resulting in a labyrinth of offices. Claire listens, her mind already turning to the mechanics of governance. She expresses a desire to observe the actual work processes, recalling her observations from her home country where she saw no issues with the workflow. Balk inquires if she has knowledge of the local tax system. Claire demonstrates her astuteness, reciting the history of the country's financial controls. She notes that when the country was a vassal state, the flow of money was strictly controlled to prevent unnatural movements. She explains how the kingdom of Valatinir used to appropriate tax revenues and financial books. Balk confirms her knowledge with a simple yes. They arrive at the destination. Balk opens a door, announcing, "Here it is." The scene that greets them is one of absolute bedlam. The room is a disaster zone of disorganization. Papers are not merely stacked, they are strewn across the floor, piled precariously on desks, and spilling off shelves. A staff member, overwhelmed by a towering stack of documents, loses his balance and crashes into the mess with a loud thud. Balk, seemingly desensitized to the chaos, attempts to continue his briefing. He begins to explain the role of a domestic manager, stating that their work concerns the country and depends on the nature of the business and the culture of the state. However, his academic explanation is drowned out by the reality before them. Claire watches, horrified, as civil servants shout across the room, trying to locate vital documents. One official yells, asking whether he should prioritize rewriting the headcount list or compiling trading revenues. Another apologizes frantically, admitting a report is still incomplete. A voice cuts through the din, asking if anyone has seen the tax revenue chart for the year. Claire's patience snaps. The disparity between Balk's orderly description and the anarchic reality is too great. She recalls Balk mentioning separate rooms for each department. Yet, looking around, she sees no separation. Administration, trade, and customs documents are jumbled together in a single, heaving mass. The shelves are overflowing and the workflow is non-existent. She steps forward, her voice ringing out with authority. She commands the room to stop working immediately. The chaotic bustling halts. Every head turns toward the crown princess. The staff stare at her, their faces blank with confusion and shock. Even Balk looks surprised by her sudden outburst. Claire does not waver. She issues a decree that stuns the room. Normal work is banned for 1 month. She declares that it is impossible to perform their duties properly in such conditions. She orders them to create a list of any missing items. Furthermore, she instructs that all materials must be grouped by year and date immediately. The civil servants look terrified, sweating nervously as they process the order to halt their frantic pace. They glance at Lord Balk, seeking guidance. Balk, however, is not angry. A small, rare smile plays on his lips as he watches Claire take command. He nods to his subordinates, instructing them to do exactly what the crown princess has said. Having established order in the first room, Claire turns to Balk and requests that he show her to the next department. Balk agrees readily. The inspection continues throughout the day. They move from office to office, witnessing similar scenes. Claire feels a lingering anxiety, suspecting that Balk's earlier smile was one of amusement at her expense. She worries he finds her amusing rather than competent. By the time evening falls, exhaustion hangs heavy over both of them. Balk checks the time, noting that dinner will be served shortly. He advises Claire to get some rest. Claire thanks him for his hard work, her body sagging with fatigue. Alone with her thoughts, Claire reflects on the day's events. She realizes that despite her fears, the civilian officials seemed to listen to her. She analyzes the root cause of the chaos she witnessed. Her mind settles on a critical logistical failure, the lack of paper. She reasons that nothing beats paper for transcribing and documenting materials. She formulates a goal, to have the necessary papers ready in a month, coinciding with the time the officials will finish sorting their files. Her thoughts drift to Lord Balk. She re-evaluates him, deciding that while he may be unsociable, he is also emotional and friendly in his own way. Later, Claire and Balk confer again. Claire presents a bold plan to address the resource shortage. She brings up the topic of Synapse, the country across the water. She asks Balk if he knows what it is famous for. Before he can answer, she explains that it is known as the land of craftsmen. Balk listens intently. Claire elaborates, explaining that Synapse produces the high-quality paper essential for the drawings and designs used in their crafting and decorating processes. She highlights a socio-economic opportunity. Many artisans in Synapse have been left out of the workforce. She proposes that they leverage this. She points out that their own country currently exports wood to Synapse. She suggests they stop merely exporting raw resources. Instead, she argues they should purchase the machinery, import an entire workshop, and hire the unemployed technicians from Synapse. She suggests offering them temporary benefits and salaries to establish domestic mass production of paper. Balk is visibly impressed. He immediately grasps the strategic value of her proposal. He agrees without hesitation, stating he will send a letter immediately. Claire presses on, emphasizing that stationery is the most basic and important tool for governance. She suggests they also hire logging companies to reduce imports further and switch entirely to national consumption. Balk watches her, his admiration growing. He listens as she seamlessly pivots to budget management. She discusses managing the budgets for these new initiatives and estimating the expenditure for each department. Balk notes with surprise that she is already familiar with all the departments. He realizes the magnitude of her contribution. He looks at her, his stern face softening. He calls her presence a godsend and describes her as too convenient personnel. He bows his head slightly, thanking her profusely for her help. Then he makes a stunning offer. He announces that he would like to create a new department called the General Affairs Department, and he wants Claire to be in charge of it. Claire is taken aback by the offer and the intensity of his gratitude. She notices he looks genuinely happy, which confuses her. She wonders if she is doing something wrong. Balk, sensing her hesitation, asks why she is so desperate to help. He points out the irony. She is in a country that was once a vassal state, a country that defeated her own homeland. He calls her a strange one. Claire's expression becomes solemn. She closes her eyes, accessing a deep well of resolve. She admits that when she married Highness Aglia, she considered herself a hostage. She confesses she came prepared to die. She opens her eyes, looking directly at Balk. She explains that despite her expectations, the people here have been welcoming to her. Because of that warmth, her perspective has shifted. She declares that this is now her country. She vows to do everything she can and to serve them with all her heart. Bulk meets her gaze. The cynicism vanishes from his eyes. He tells her that he understands very well that she is telling the truth. The heavy moment is broken by the practicalities of the day. Bulk notes it is almost 7 o'clock. He expresses his desire to have good relations with her moving forward. Suddenly, Claire realizes the time and the breach of protocol. She panics, apologizing profusely. She bids him farewell, promising to see him tomorrow, and scampers away down the hallway. Bulk watches her retreating figure, the strange princess who has already begun to reshape his world. He hums thoughtfully to himself, alone in the hallway. The afternoon light filtered softly into the drawing room, illuminating the intricate patterns of the porcelain tea set resting on the table, where a young man with disheveled dark hair and piercing eyes leaned forward, his chin resting upon his interlaced fingers as he scrutinized the young woman across from him. He observed the subtle signs of fatigue etched onto her delicate features, breaking the silence to remark with gentle concern that Claire looked incredibly tired. Claire, whose mind had been drifting far away into deep contemplation, jolted slightly at the sudden address, her eyes widening in a mix of surprise and confusion as she stammered a hesitant acknowledgement. The atmosphere in the room carried the weight of recent events, heavily influenced by the context of a hostage princess who had unexpectedly been welcomed as a brilliant intellect in an enemy nation. Claire's internal thoughts churned with anxiety, her memory flashing back to the bustling activity of the government department she had recently appended. She recalled the murmurs of dissatisfaction among the staff, acutely aware that being bossed around by a newcomer, a little girl no less, must have felt humiliating for the established officials. She lowered her gaze, confessing to the prince that she knew her actions were selfish, yet her voice trailed off as she sought reassurance regarding the anger of His Majesty and His Highness. She hurriedly explained that her drastic reorganization was a spur-of-the-moment decision, driven by a desperate desire to avoid halting the entire department for a month just to shuffle personnel. Prince Aglia, maintaining his relaxed posture, offered a soft laugh that dispelled the tension in the air. He assured her with absolute conviction that both his father and he possessed unwavering confidence in her abilities. He framed the upheaval not as a disturbance, but as a necessary opportunity, drawing a parallel to a post-war process where systems must be dismantled to be improved, suggesting that just like a nation recovering from conflict, their department needed significant changes to evolve. Despite his reassuring words, a shadow of insecurity loomed over Claire. The visual representation of her inner psyche darkened as the terrifying possibility of failure whispered in her mind. She acknowledged her own lack of practical experience, viewing herself as merely a head case, filled with theoretical knowledge but untested in the gritty reality of administration. The stakes felt monumentally high, for she feared that a single misstep would cost her this sanctuary, a place that had strangely become more comfortable than her own homeland, and that the faith placed in her would evaporate, leaving her isolated once more. Sensing the spiral of her dark thoughts, Aglia abruptly shifted the conversation, his attention drifting to the beverage steaming in the cup before him. He lifted his gaze, commenting on the pleasant scent wafting from the liquid, noting with a connoisseur's curiosity that the aroma was distinct from the coffee he knew. He struggled to pinpoint the fragrance, describing it as a blend of milk and honey, while reminiscing that in the Vietnam Empire, tea was strictly categorized as either oolong or green, leaving this new sensory experience a mystery to him. He took a tentative sip, his expression one of genuine intrigue as he questioned if the beverage was truly tea at all. Claire, grateful for the distraction, engaged in the culinary explanation, thanking him for the food and noting that the warm drink was specifically prepared to help rest a weary mind. She clarified that the drink was called black tea, derived from the exact same plant as the green tea he was familiar with, but differentiated by the manufacturing process which allowed the leaves to ferment, resulting in a richer, more complex fragrance. Aglia admitted he had never encountered such a delightful aroma, confessing that in the Empire, the art of brewing such tea had been lost to time, remaining only as descriptions within ancient books. He emphasized its utility for fatigue, encouraging her to drink. Claire lifted the cup, the liquid warm against her lips, and found herself surprised by the flavor. Contrary to her expectation of bitterness, the taste was smooth and deeply delicious. She drank eagerly, the soothing warmth spreading through her, and realized with a start that her cup was already empty. She turned to Aglia, her eyes sparkling with renewed energy, and confirmed the drink's deliciousness. Aglia, observing the color return to her cheeks, smiled knowingly, revealing that his digression into tea trivia had been a calculated maneuver to pull her mind away from her heavy anxieties. He chuckled softly, his demeanor shifting into a playful teasing as he noted the milk content justified the name milk tea, but then he leaned in closer, his gaze fixing on her face. He called her name softly, complimenting her cuteness before pointing out that she had a bit of chestnut cream stuck on her cheek. Before Claire could react or reach for a napkin, Aglia closed the distance and, with a casual intimacy that sent shockwaves through the room, licked the cream directly from her face. He pulled back with a satisfied smirk, remarking on the sweetness, while Claire erupted into a flustered panic, her face burning red as she shrieked at him. Unfazed by her outburst, Aglia playfully demanded she not cheat on him, to which the overwhelming embarrassment forced Claire to retort that she would never do such a thing and thus wouldn't even know how. The scene concluded with Aglia encouraging her to do her best tomorrow, leaving Claire flustered but undeniably energized by the interaction. The narrative shifted abruptly from the intimacy of the drawing room to the cold, hard logistics of governance and industry. A report was being delivered regarding delinquent taxes, specifically concerning official documents detailing unpaid levies on land and property. Lord Balk, a tall man with long, sleek hair and glasses, outlined the situation regarding the Kingdom of Synapse, a region teeming with paper mills that had fallen behind on their tax obligations. This financial failure provided a strategic opening. The administration moved to secure the machinery and technicians from these failing mills, offering to cover their debts, relocation costs, advance wages, and housing guarantees in exchange for their relocation to Valatinir. This aggressive recruitment strategy aimed to centralize paper production under their control. Flashbacks revealed the execution of this industrial maneuver, showing Claire and Lord Balk standing at a bustling port city, watching the influx of resources. Claire, positioned as the mastermind, observed the crates of machinery and the flow of craftsmen arriving by ship, taking charge of deciding exactly where these new assets would be deployed. The ease of duplicating documents through these new letterpress workshops was identified as a critical advantage for organizing official forms, a massive leap forward in bureaucratic efficiency. Claire and Balk discussed the newfound independence of their nation. No longer a vassal of the empire, they anticipated a surge in traffic and people entering from other kingdoms, necessitating a new level of spatial organization. The conversation turned to the creation of a comprehensive map, a task requiring a specific type of individual possessing an innate sense of direction, knowledge of topography, and familiarity with the kingdom's roads and villages. Claire reasoned that merchants, who frequently traveled between kingdoms and managed transportation, would be the ideal candidates for this mapping endeavor. However, she acknowledged the difficulty in recruiting them, as merchants were notoriously cautious, trained to protect their cargo and money, and often reluctant to work directly for the state unless the incentives were overwhelming. Balk noted that unless they offered something truly lucrative, producing a great deal of profit, negotiations would stall. Claire, struck by realization, proposed a bold economic concession. She suggested forming a dedicated mapping department but outsourcing the actual operations to the Chamber of Commerce. The bargaining chip would be a state-sanctioned monopoly. The merchants would be granted the exclusive rights to sell paper copies of the government-mandated maps, along with a monopoly on the distribution of paper and ink throughout the country, excluding only the national market. Balk, adjusting his glasses, immediately understood the value of this proposition, noting that merchants involved in post-war trade knew better than anyone the immense value of paper and ink. Furthermore, the guarantee of working with the government ensured they would be paid on time, removing a common risk for private traders. 3 days later, this strategy was put to the test in a high-stakes meeting with representatives from the Chambers of Commerce. Lord Balk stood at the head of the long table, his imposing figure and confident voice dominating the room as he explained the mapping department and the lucrative concessions on offer. Claire sat quietly to the side, painfully aware of her own lack of negotiation skills, feeling terrible and relying entirely on Balk to guide the proceedings. She had admitted earlier that she was merely a reader, not a talker, and felt embarrassed by her inability to lead the discussion, though Balk had lamented that her engagement to the Lord prevented him from using her talents more directly. The result was a resounding success. Balk's calm demeanor overwhelmed the merchants, and the 7 chambers of commerce in attendance agreed to cooperate on creating and updating the maps in exchange for the concessions. Claire, observing the victory from the sidelines, stood as tall as she could, serving as the silent authority behind the deal. She expressed immense relief to Balk afterwards, admitting that had she been the one speaking, she would have been fidgety and flustered, grateful that his presence had secured the cooperation they needed. With the external logistics settled, the focus shifted to the internal reorganization of the government departments. Returning to the privacy of her quarters, the physical toll of Claire's relentless work became visible. She stared into a hand mirror, dismayed to find dark circles forming under her eyes, realizing she had been driving herself too hard. Her maid, Millie, immediately stepped in with professional cheerfulness, asking Claire to leave the matter to her. With deft hands and a brush, Millie applied makeup, expertly concealing the signs of fatigue and choosing a shade that highlighted Claire's face. Claire looked at the result with awe, praising Millie's amazing skill as the dark circles vanished from sight. However, Millie's tone turned serious as she warned Claire that while the makeup could hide the exhaustion for now, it was vital that she not push herself to the breaking point, promising to prepare chamomile tea to ensure she slept well. Freshly composed, Claire proceeded to brief the team on the near completion of the department reorganization. She outlined the new structure with precision, The General Affairs Department would serve as the central hub, managing headcount lists, land allocations, and distributing necessary materials to all other offices. The Tax Department would calculate taxes based on these rosters and land data. The Finance Department would prepare quarterly budgets and allocate surplus funds to the needy. The Administration Department would handle detailed records of Treasury funds and compile petitions. Claire explained that the General Affairs Department would also act as a check against fraud, preventing document forgery by strictly managing paper and ink inventories and overseeing the disposal of miswritten documents. She expressed confidence that with Lord Balk and his trusted staff running this central department, the system would stabilize, requiring only minor adjustments based on future feedback. As the day wound down, Aglia praised Claire for her hard work and invited her to dinner. He noted that while she had done as much as possible in a month, the work was never truly done. He suggested they share a cup of tea after the meal, though he claimed he didn't work nights, a statement that seemed to carry a double meaning. Later, Claire found herself sinking into a bath, the water offering a momentary escape from the pressures of the court. Her thoughts turned inward, acknowledging her status as an outsider. She knew that many people were unhappy with her presence and her sudden, sweeping changes to the regime. She suspected that Aglia, his father, and Lord Balk were shielding her from the harshest criticisms, venting their frustrations in places where she couldn't hear them to protect her feelings. She resolved not to ask about it or dwell on it, maintaining a stoic facade to survive. Exiting the bath and preparing for bed, Claire bid the maids good night, her demeanor calm despite the internal turmoil. The maids fussed over her, urging her to drink her tea before it got cold and worrying about her skin suffering from late nights. Left alone with her tea, Claire's reflection was somber. She admitted to herself that the lack of sleep was causing eye bags, but rationalized the stress as a normal part of starting something new. She told herself she was used to being badmouthed and that she was doing her part to move the kingdom forward. She thought of His Highness Aglia as kind and hardworking, yet a persistent, unshakable feeling of insecurity gnawed at her. She couldn't understand why this dread lingered despite her logical defenses. The source of her dread was revealed in a shocking twist occurring elsewhere in the palace. A letter had arrived from the Empire, causing panic among the royals. The king, flustered, read the missive which declared that since the marriage ceremony had not been concluded, the Empire now deemed the second princess, Claire, to be defective. The letter chillingly requested that she be exchanged for the third princess. Aglia stood reading the document, his face darkening with realization. He understood immediately that this was not a simple diplomatic request, but a reaction to Claire's brilliance. He realized that the imperial spies within the country had reported on Claire's innovations, her introduction of papermaking, letterpress printing, and administrative reform. The Empire, specifically her father, had assessed her capabilities and concluded that she was too dangerous to be left in the hands of a rival nation. Aglia concluded, with a grim expression, that Claire had been too conspicuous, and now her very competence had placed a target on her back. Dark memories of a past life surged through Claire's mind, echoing with the cruel, dismissive voice of a father who never saw her worth. The spectral voice taunts her, reminding her that she was married off to a man simply because she lacked the grace of a lady, a disposal of a useless asset intended to meet its end in a foreign land. The narrative of her existence within the Phaeton Empire was written in cold indifference. They cared nothing for her intellect or the vast studies she had consumed. In that stifling world, a woman's value was tethered solely to her aesthetic appeal, her ability to stand ornamentally beside a man, and her capacity to serve as a sufficient accessory to male power. This internal reflection swirls within Claire, a storm of quiet confusion and simmering anger, as she confronts a letter sent from that very homeland. The context of this sudden communication becomes clear as she processes the shift in her father's perspective. He has reassessed her, determining that her unique abilities are no longer trash, but rather useful and dangerous to have on hand. The Empire has evolved, drowning in a rapid increase of paperwork and technological innovations, creating a bureaucratic labyrinth that now demands the very intellect they once scorned, prompting her father to demand her return. The King of Valentinir reads the ultimatum aloud, his voice heavy with the gravity of the threat, a formal request for the exchange of the second princess with the third princess. He questions the audacity of the Empire, wondering if they cannot simply allow a new wind to blow through his country, permitting it to grow and develop without their meddling interference. The scene shifts to a tense confrontation involving the king, Prince Aglia, and Claire. Claire grapples with a darkening thought, wondering if this crisis would have been averted had she simply remained in her homeland, resigning herself to a miserable existence where scorn was her daily bread. She questions if accepting the request is the path of least resistance. However, Prince Aglia cuts through her self-doubt with fierce possessiveness, declaring unequivocally that he wants no one but Claire. The king, holding the parchment with a trembling grip, elucidates the Empire's pretext for this demand. They claim an insult and unfair treatment of their imperial princess. The ultimatum is stark and carries a brutal timeline. Within 1 month, if Valentinier does not comply with the request or provide a just explanation, the empire will be forced to wage war. The king reveals there is a continuation to the letter, his face contorted with frustration and regret. He laments his past decisions, cursing under his breath and wondering if he should have married Claire to Aglia first, even if only for appearances, to solidify her position. The shock of the situation reverberates through the room, leaving Aglia and Claire stunned. Despite the looming threat, Aglia turns to Claire with a reassuring smile, prioritizing her emotional state over the geopolitical crisis. He affirms that Claire is a benefactor of their country, a living person with knowledge, and he refuses to subject her to a heartless wedding or hand her over like a bargaining chip. Claire, however, burdens herself with the weight of the conflict, believing it to be her fault and resolving not to let war break out between the two nations on her account. She analyzes the strategic reality with cold logic. Valentinier currently lacks the strength to fight another war. She recalls that the kingdom won the previous conflict only because it capitalized on the Phaeton Empire's exhaustion from invading other countries. The king sits in his chambers, the weight of the crown heavy on his brow, while Aglia stands protectively near Claire. Claire's demeanor shifts from guilt to determination. She declares that she could never forgive a return to the status of a dependent state, used as a pawn by the empire. With a steely gaze, she requests a mere 3 days from the king. She promises to formulate a counter-strategy within that short window. Claire retreats to the solitude of a balcony, the night air wrapping around the stone structures of the castle. She forces her mind to work, discarding prudish hesitation in favor of ruthless calculation. She assesses their leverage. What can they throw at the empire, and what retaliation would they receive from her father? She coaches herself to think, to anticipate every possible pattern of engagement. She notes that the departments within Valentinier are being reorganized and are beginning to run normally, and with the presence of Sir Bulk, their security is robust. Her internal resolve hardens as she stares out into the darkness. She acknowledges that she has proven to be nothing more than a danger to the empire in their eyes. She decides firmly that she has no intention of returning to people who place no value on her life. Instead, she chooses to walk alongside the people of Valentinier who need her, and specifically with His Highness Aglia. The grim reality of a return to the empire plays out in her mind. At best, she would face house arrest, at worst, execution. She reiterates her distaste for war and her refusal to be the catalyst for bloodshed. 3 days pass, and the scene returns to the king's chambers. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation. The king, looking weary but attentive, asks if any good ideas have come to mind. Claire sits beside Aglia, who looks on with concern. She drops a bombshell of a proposal, stating calmly that she intends to hold herself hostage. The absurdity and boldness of the statement shock the king and Aglia, eliciting confused exclamations. Claire instructs them to reply to the empire with this specific threat. The king is baffled, stammering as he tries to process the logic behind her words. Aglia immediately objects, claiming that such a feat is impossible. However, Claire counters with the true extent of her power. She reveals that she holds within her mind the contents of all the books and documents that ever existed in the imperial palace. She asserts that her plan is not impossible. She dictates the terms of the reply. In the event of the exchange, I, Claire, of the Phaeton Empire, will take a look at the annual budget proposal, including the number of troops, farming, trade, and the number of each private army in the nobles' register, and inform all your vassals in detail and return. The king realizes the magnitude of her leverage. She is truly a person with living knowledge. He stammers, understanding the devastation such an information leak would cause. Claire confirms his fears with a dark serenity, acknowledging that if she were to execute this threat, there is no doubt it would be a catastrophic blow to the empire. She admits it is a direct threat. She accepts the terrifying consequence. Her life will be in grave danger within the empire if she returns. She urges the king to send this reply. With a chilling resolve, she explains that she entered her marriage expecting to die, and so she intends to make the most of her life now, regardless of the risk. The king, impressed and convinced by her resolve, agrees to the plan. He declares that Claire's safety is synonymous with the safety of the country. He issues immediate orders to increase her security detail, ensuring thoroughly that she is safe from poisoning, and commands the immediate house arrest of any suspected spies. In a private moment, the facade of invincibility slips. Claire clutches her chest, confessing to Aglia that the truth is she is very scared. Yet she affirms that she has made up her mind. Aglia, moved by her bravery and vulnerability, gazes at her with deep affection and determination. He vows to protect her in any way that he can. Claire reflects on the change in her life. She now has people who protect her and has been given a place where she truly belongs. The narrative jumps forward to the aftermath of the letter. The strategy proves effective. Aglia notes that his father-in-law is quick to cut his losses, a trait he expected. The king of Valentinier reveals that the emperor received the threatening letter and responded immediately. The empire's response is a complete capitulation. We withdraw our request and would like to arrange a meeting to personally apologize. The king sighs, noting that they must accept the meeting since a peace treaty exists between the nations. However, the victory is laced with suspicion. The king discusses the results, noting that refusing the meeting could be interpreted as a sign of willingness to start a war. The meeting is scheduled for 1 month's time at the royal palace in Valentinier. Aglia remains cynical, predicting that while they say they are sorry, they will likely bring along 500 soldiers under the guise of an escort. Claire, looking somber, worries about the king's position and the immense pressure this places on him. The king reassures her, explaining his own tactical response. He mobilized his people and army, choosing to fight. He responded to the letter with a strict condition. The country is secure, so only 10 men can escort you beyond the border. He acknowledges that Valentinier has been a vassal state for a long time, a fact Claire's father knows well. Aglia and Claire share a quiet tea time, the weight of the past surfacing. Aglia admits that he took up his sword because war is a sad thing. Claire, trembling slightly, validates his choice, stating it is unfair not to fight when one has to. Aglia probes gently, asking if she hates him for that decision. He observes that she would never have thought of going independent on her own. He laments that if only there had been medical help from the Empire during the previous conflict, things might have been different. Claire affirms his feelings with a simple, yeah. Claire looks at Aglia with gratitude, her eyes shimmering. She tells him that she is prepared for the meeting, as it would be strange if she were not present. Aglia confesses a desire to hide her away to keep her safe. Claire touches his face gently, listing the reasons she cherishes him. He is someone who is kind to her, someone who appreciates her, someone who fought for her ability to laugh, and someone who came for her. She admits she has misgivings, but if she is with Highness Aglia, she feels secure. In a whisper of intimacy, she expresses her desire to get married. Aglia, flustered and blushing, playfully retorts that it's impossible to believe she doesn't like him. The scene shifts to the practicalities of defense. Aglia reassures Claire, and then turns to the maids standing nearby. He confirms that all the maids assigned to Claire are, in fact, trained escorts identified for the peace treaty. The maids, appearing innocent in their frilly uniforms, suddenly reveal hidden knives and weaponry with cheerful smiles. Claire is taken aback by this revelation. Aglia adds that his younger brother will also be there to protect her. Aglia warns Claire sternly that she must never act alone. The conversation takes a light-hearted turn as Aglia demands she not cheat on him, to which Claire vehemently responds that she won't. Then, the younger brother makes his entrance. He strikes a dramatic pose, introducing himself as Julius, firstborn of the kingdom of Valentinier. He declares it an honor to meet the hero of our country, the person with living knowledge. Claire is dazzled by the sheer amount of sparkles emanating from his charismatic presence. Julius is immediately scolded by Sir Bulk for pointing his finger, and he apologizes profusely. Aglia tells Julius to calm down, warning that his behavior might give the wrong impression. Julius abruptly shifts the topic, asking his brother why he isn't getting married yet. The narrative outlines the full security detail. Claire will be guarded at all times by 5 men, 3 ladies-in-waiting who handle dark weapons, and the current knight, His Highness Julius. Additionally, Lord Bulk, a former knight who taught swordsmanship to Aglia, is present as an ostensible bodyguard. The group gathers to discuss the strategy for the upcoming meeting. The king warns that while the Empire claims to be coming for an apology, they will definitely try to take Claire's life if there is an opening. He notes that spies are under house arrest, but vigilance is paramount. Suddenly, a comedic flashback interrupts the serious tone. Julius exclaims that he will not put the person who saved his life in danger. The life-saving event is revealed to be Claire saving him from a wheat allergy, depicted with chibi characters where Claire prevents him from eating bread. Aglia brings the focus back to the present, stating there is one more thing to take care of: how to set him up. Claire, puzzled, asks what he means by set up. Aglia points at her. Claire smiles, stating she thinks it is a good idea. Aglia finds the concept interesting. Then, with a serene and terrifying smile, Claire announces her role in the setup: I'm going to drink poison. The room erupts in shock. Aglia yells, H. He immediately rejects the plan, shouting that if poison is involved, he will drink it himself. The king and others protest, telling Claire she cannot do that and not to be too hasty. Aglia looks at her with intense worry, declaring he is against it. He refuses to accept a plan where there is even an unlikely chance that she lies down and doesn't come back. A young girl nearby also expresses her disapproval. The king, stroking his mustache, looks unimpressed and concerned. However, Claire remains resolute. She asserts that with her knowledge, the second princess confronts her father, the king. She declares she is going to take advantage of herself to the fullest. She claims to know exactly what she needs to do to prevent any permanent harm from happening. She dismisses Aglia's concern by stating she can't help in battle anyway, implying this risky gambit is her battlefield. The chapter ends with the tension of this suicidal strategy hanging in the air. The king of Valatinir, holding a posture of regal defiance, initiates the confrontation by declaring that preparations should commence. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, locks onto the man opposite him, the Emperor of Phaetonum, as he formally abdicates the battlefield of physical combat, instead challenging the visiting monarch to a battle of diplomacy and intellect, referring to it as a war of words. The atmosphere in the room thickens with the weight of unsaid threats, the tension palpable as the king hints that the visiting delegation, ostensibly there for peace, is composed largely of combat-ready personnel, a subtle accusation that the emperor is posturing for war. Elsewhere, in the quiet seclusion of her chambers, Claire, the second empress now married into the kingdom of Valatinir, prepares for a gamble that risks her very life. Her reflection in the mirror reveals a woman steeled against fear, even as her handmaiden stammers in terror, unable to comprehend Claire's willingness to consume poison voluntarily. Claire silences the girl's fears with cold logic, explaining that if she refuses the poison, the failure will cost the servants their livelihoods and escalate the incident into a political disaster that could reignite the war. She lifts a small vial, a secret concoction she describes as a neutralizer, a specialized compound designed to interact with the poison she anticipates and render it non-lethal. She meticulously verifies the mixture of the poison and its antidote, ensuring the chemistry will hold, before turning her attention to her maid, Melissa, Millie, requesting a private audience to discuss a final, critical instruction. The narrative shifts to the Grand Hall, where the diplomatic veneer barely conceals the hostility beneath. A month has passed since the initial tensions, and now the two countries have gathered for a formal meeting and dinner involving the delegation, Claire's father the Emperor, and the third Princess Lilia. The King of Valatinir stands before the assembly, his voice booming with performative gratitude as he presents Claire not as a hostage, but as a beloved wife to his son Aglia, a woman devoted to the service of her new country. He apologizes with a razor-thin veil of politeness for the lack of a grand ceremony, citing the post-war recovery as the reason for the modest festivities. The Emperor of Phaetonum listens, his expression unreadable, as the king subtly reprimands him for making unreasonable requests in the past. Beneath the surface of this gentle greeting lies a steel trap. The king's praise of Claire serves as a territorial claim, signaling that she belongs to Valatinir now and he will not surrender her, nor will he allow the empire to dispose of her to create a pretext for conflict. The subtext strikes with the force of a hammer. If Claire is deemed a threat by her father, Valatinir will protect her, and if Phaetonum seeks war, they will find a kingdom ready to defend its new princess. The king's ultimatum hangs in the air. If the emperor insists on hostilities, he will find no easy sacrifice here, suggesting that perhaps another princess should be offered if the emperor wishes to concede on other political fronts. Seated at the long banquet table, the dynamics of the royal families play out in silence. Claire sits flanked by powerful men, feeling the intensity of their gazes. To her side sits Prince Aglia, her husband, and opposite them sits Julius, while behind her stands Lord Bulk, creating a protective yet suffocating ring of male presence. Lilia, the third princess of Phaetonum, observes Claire with a gaze dripping with malice, noting that despite the handsomeness of the men present, Claire seems out of place. The emperor breaks his silence, addressing his daughter with a voice that feigns paternal concern but drips with condescension, noting that she appears to be doing what she is supposed to be doing. Claire responds with a practiced courtesy, welcoming the emperor and expressing her pleasure at seeing him in good health. Lilia, unable to contain her venom, leans in with a smirk, commenting on Claire's appearance. She observes that her sister has lost weight, suggesting with a cruel lilt that perhaps Claire is having trouble digesting her food. The implication is clear to everyone at the table. Lilia is mocking Claire's precarious position, hinting that her food might be tampered with. Lilia continues, expressing disappointed sarcasm that Claire is being replaced by someone the emperor despises, taunting her about the gaps in her perfect lady's education. Aglia, sitting beside Claire, stiffens as he deciphers the code behind Lilia's words. He realizes that the princess is explicitly signaling that the food is poisoned right now. Claire, refusing to be rattled, counters Lilia's insult with a disarming smile. She attributes her weight loss to the busy nature of her new life, moving around the palace and engaging in her duties. She emphatically denies any illness, complimenting the cuisine of Valatinir as delicious, a direct rebuttal to Lilia's suggestion that the food is inedible or dangerous. The tension snaps focus to the tea service. A maid approaches, the spout of a silver teapot tilting over a delicate porcelain cup. As the dark liquid streams into the cup, a fine powder is visibly sprinkled into the mix, dissolving instantly into the tea, a visual confirmation of the assassination attempt. The emperor watches the process, his eyes narrowing with satisfaction as he declares that this is a specialty tea from Phaetonum. He lifts his own cup, remarking that this is the first time he has ever been served good tea, a coded message that the deed is done. Claire stares at the cup before her. She knows the moment has arrived. To seize control of the narrative and prevent her father from claiming she was murdered by Valentinier negligence, she realizes she must drink the poison knowingly, relying on the neutralizer she took earlier. She lifts the cup, the aroma of the tea masking the lethal agent within. In her mind, she acknowledges that the Empire likely plans to dispose of Lilia as well eventually, but for now, Claire is the primary target. The Emperor stands, raising his glass in a toast that rings hollow with hypocrisy, dedicating the drink to the peace between the Empire of Phaetonum and the Kingdom of Valentinier. As the crystal glasses clink and the guests drink, Claire consumes the poison tea. The reaction is almost instantaneous. Her breath hitches, her hand flies to her mouth, and a convulsion racks her slender frame. Aglia, watching her like a hawk, screams her name as she pitches forward. The banquet hall erupts into chaos. Aglia catches her collapsing body, his face twisted in horror and rage. He shouts orders to the frozen servants, commanding them to get her into a room immediately. Amidst the confusion, a whisper circulates. The soup, or perhaps the tea, was poisoned. Aglia carries Claire in his arms, her body limp against his chest. Even in her fading consciousness, Claire's mind races with political calculus. She understands that her father attempted this assassination because it was his last opportunity to kill her on Valentinier's soil and blame it on them. She knows that if the Emperor discovers she has survived the lethal dose, he will be forced to visit her, trapping him in a scenario she has already scripted. She had previously briefed the King of Valentinier on this exact sequence of events, ensuring that the entire Valentinier court is aware she intended to drink the poison voluntarily. As her vision blurs, she whispers a plea to Aglia, begging him to come see her later, reinforcing their bond even as she slips into the darkness induced by the toxin. In the aftermath, the King of Valentinier confronts the Emperor in a corridor, the air frigid with accusation. The king suggests the poison could have been planted in the middle of the meal, dismantling the Emperor's potential deniability. He explains that due to the lingering grudges from the war, the palace kitchen takes extreme precautions to ensure no one is poisoned, implying that an internal breach by the Phaetonum delegation is the only logical explanation. The Emperor, realizing his ploy is unraveling, attempts to pivot, demanding the cancellation of the peace treaty item, a desperate move to salvage his political objective. The king dismisses this immediately, pointing out that this demand is no different from the unreasonable requests the Emperor made earlier. The King of Valentinier draws a hard line in the sand. He declares he will not leave his daughter-in-law in a dangerous environment, effectively taking custody of Claire's safety away from her father. He challenges the Emperor, asking if he is truly ready for the challenge that such a betrayal invites. He reveals that Claire knew her life was threatened by people within Valentinier, spies, yet she insisted on remaining in the palace, a testament to her loyalty that shames the Emperor's treachery. The king emphasizes that the marriage was intended to strengthen the peace between the two countries, and now the Emperor seeks to reverse that progress. He ruthlessly exposes the Emperor's hypocrisy. The Emperor knew Claire was walking into a trap, and the king knew the Emperor sent her as a sacrifice, yet the marriage proceeded. The king delivers the final blow to the Emperor's pride, asking if he still desires a war instead of offering the apology that is due. Later, the Emperor and Lilia stand outside Claire's recovery room. The Emperor, looking ragged and defeated, processes the king's defiance. A servant announces their arrival to the occupants of the room, stating that His Majesty the Emperor and Her Imperial Highness the Third Princess have come to visit. Inside, the scene they find destroys their expectations. Instead of a corpse, they find Claire reclining in bed, weak but undeniably alive. Aglia stands by her side, a sentinel of fury. The Emperor's face twists in shock as Claire greets him, assuring him she will get better soon. She reveals she drank medicine mixed with water, a cover story for her neutralizer, which saved her life. The Emperor, forcing a mask of concern, asks if she is okay, but the disappointment in his eyes is evident. Realizing the assassination has failed and the political leverage has evaporated, the Emperor abruptly announces they are leaving tomorrow morning. Before departing, he casts a look at Claire, muttering a cryptic instruction not to make her suffer, likely referring to Lilia or perhaps a feigned concern for Claire herself to save face. Once the door closes, the facade drops completely. Aglia, trembling with suppressed rage, turns to the corner of the room where the maids are cowering. He draws his sword, the metal singing as it clears the scabbard. He advances on the servants, his eyes burning with the need to punish the treachery that nearly stole his wife. He demands they let go of him as other guards try to restrain his lethal advance. He screams at his father, the king, questioning why they should show mercy. Claire intervenes, her voice cutting through Aglia's fury. She reveals the depth of her preparation. She explains that she had already washed all the intruders, meaning she had identified and purged the spies surrounding her long before this night. She clarifies that even those closest to her were scrutinized, so she could be fully prepared for this moment. She confirms that none of the spies she placed under house arrest were the potential perpetrators of the assassination. She had neutralized the threats in advance. She turns her gaze to Millie, the maid who served the tea. Claire explains that she intentionally left Millie and 2 others out of the purge because she deemed them the most trustworthy, or rather, the most useful for her plan. She had interrogated each lady-in-waiting individually to gauge their loyalties. Claire then drops the revelation. She knew the milk tea served by Millie was poisoned. She admits the timing was not exactly what she expected, but she was ready. She looks at Millie, who is weeping on the floor, and notes that Millie seems surprised to see Claire alive, shocked that the poison she administered didn't work. Claire declares with absolute resolve that she has no intention of dying, nor will she allow herself to be killed by the pain and hatred of the people of this country. The narrative delves into Millie's tragic backstory to explain her betrayal. Millie was the only one of the maids who had lost her mother to a wheat allergy, likely a cover for a resource shortage or poisoning incident during the war, and her father to the combat itself. Millie had been manipulated into becoming an interloper by Claire's father, the Emperor, who exploited her family's old noble origins in Valatinir and the misfortunes that befell her relatives to turn her into a weapon. Claire reveals that she told no one about using the antidote, not even Aglia, to ensure the reaction was genuine. She looks down at the sobbing maid. Instead of condemning her to execution, Claire offers forgiveness. She apologizes for not being able to fix everything that broke Millie's life. But she firmly states she cannot let Millie die. She decrees that Millie will be sent back to her birthplace in Phaetonum, sparing her from Valatinir justice. Claire's punishment for the spy is not death, but life. She wants Millie to watch as Claire changes this country, to survive and witness the transformation of the kingdom she hated enough to kill for. Aglia, still gripping his sword, struggles with this leniency. He argues that they cannot simply leave the country's security to spies who betrayed it. Claire counters gently, reminding Aglia that there are many people like Millie in his kingdom, people who lost family to the war or the tragedies associated with the wheat allergy famine. She insists that healing these wounds is more vital than vengeance. Aglia, moved by his wife's wisdom and mercy, finally relents, sheathing his anger. He agrees to her terms. Claire turns back to Millie, imploring her to move in the right direction. She expresses a hope that one day, these people will be glad that she, Claire, made a change to such a country. She dismisses the maid, telling her to have a good night's sleep, closing the chapter on the assassination attempt. The resolution of the political crisis is swift and decisive. The Emperor and Lilia are effectively confined to their quarters until morning, after which they are to return home immediately. Claire reflects that perhaps the worst-case scenario, total war, has been spared. She reveals she petitioned for the best possible accommodations for Millie's travel, ensuring the spy is treated with dignity rather than as a prisoner. Claire muses that under normal circumstances, a failed assassin like Millie would be executed and her birthplace demolished as punishment. However, Claire's mercy allows Millie to survive and see the future Claire is building. Claire admits to herself that this act of mercy might be selfish, a way to prove her own power to change fate. The broader political fallout is managed with equal finesse. The wheat allergy problem that plagued the region is settled not by swords, but by science and logistics. Valatinir sends doctors and druggists, provides medical books, and pays compensation to the affected areas in Phaetonum. Claire orchestrates the narrative control, deciding that this solution will be published as a story in the next issue of the magazine, turning a crisis into propaganda for peace. The plotting of the Phaetonum Empire is buried. To avoid the massive trouble that would arise if the assassination attempt were made public, the incident is spun. Instead of a story about a coup, it becomes a story about a minor stir in the royal court where Claire, through a desperate measure, escaped a personal plight. The final scene finds Claire exhausted but victorious. She expresses a simple, domestic desire to have a cup of tea with His Highness Aglia. This time, a cup she knows is safe. Her thoughts turn to her own recovery. She needs to rest and flush the remaining poison from her system. The sacrifice has survived, and in doing so, she has conquered not just her father's scheme, but the cycle of hatred that threatened to consume 2 kingdoms. The heavy haze of unconsciousness begins to lift, consciousness returning to Claire not as a sudden jolt, but as a slow, confused awakening. Her eyes flutter open, struggling to focus on the ceiling above her, her mind still reeling from the void of sleep. Beside her bed, a maid, Gwenna, reacts with explosive energy, her composure shattering the moment she notices her mistress stirring. Gwenna does not hesitate. She pivots instantly, shouting orders to herself and the empty air, declaring that she must summon the doctor and His Highness immediately. The maid's panic is palpable, a whirlwind of motion as she dashes out of the room, leaving the door wide open in her wake. Voices echo from the hallway, a chorus of relief and urgency. Someone cries out Claire's name with the force of a prayer answered. Another voice, trembling with emotion, sobs out their gladness. Claire, however, remains focused on the physical reality of her body. She speaks, her voice likely raspy from disuse, complaining that her back and hips feel as stiff as rocks after her prolonged immobility. A gentle pair of hands assists her, offering to help loosen her stiffened joints, urging her to sit up slowly. The narrator reflects on the gravity of the situation. This is Claire, the woman who saved Valentinier from a crisis by taking a stand, now beginning her recovery. Claire undertakes a clinical assessment of her own condition, flexing her fingers and taking deep, testing breaths. She confirms internally that the detoxification process was a success. She notes with a calm, analytical satisfaction that she has no difficulty breathing, and the numbness that once plagued her has completely vanished. She clenches her hand into a fist, testing her motor control, and finds that the movement is pain-free. Suddenly, the doorway fills with frantic figures. His Highness Aglia bursts in, his usual royal composure replaced by raw, unmasked anxiety. Behind him, the stoic Lord Bulk and a tearful maid, likely Aglia's attendant, watch with bated breath. Aglia rushes to the bedside, his eyes wide, sweat visible on his brow as he cries out her name. He brings his hands together, his voice dropping to a whisper of profound relief, admitting how truly glad he is to see her eyes open. The maid, Aglia, addresses her formally, tears streaming down her face. The room settles into a quieter, more intimate atmosphere. Aglia leans over Claire, his face close to hers, a soft blush coloring his cheeks as he gazes at her with undisguised affection. Claire learns that she has been asleep for approximately 3 days. She looks up at him, her expression softening, and announces simply that she has returned. Aglia, his eyes filled with warmth, welcomes her back, the phrase carrying the weight of a fear now extinguished. In the days that follow, life begins to return to a semblance of normalcy. Claire narrates her recovery process, noting that she was finally able to settle down and reunite with everyone. She sits in a chair, sipping soup provided by a maid, acknowledging that she needs to recover slowly over the next few days before she is fully ready to move again. A panel shows the king, Aglia, and maids surrounding her. The king looks particularly emotional, while maids embrace in the background. Other scenes depict Claire walking in the garden with her attendants, regaining her strength. Claire's mind, however, never truly stops working. She reflects that it is acceptable for them to rest for the time being. She considers the reparations and the political fallout, calculating that the medical assistance and knowledge provided, along with the reparations, should be sufficient compensation. She confirms with herself that the opposing party has agreed never to bother their country again. Her thoughts turn darker as she considers the fate of her father and Millie, asking with a chillingly sweet smile how they will be dealt with. The scene shifts to a gathering of the royal family and close aides. The king is weeping comically, shaking with relief and gratitude that Claire is safe. Aglia stands beside him, looking exasperated by his father's display. Claire, however, cuts through the emotion with a sudden, serious request. She turns to Aglia, her expression determined. Aglia looks at her, curious. With unwavering directness, Claire asks His Highness to marry her. The room goes silent. Aglia stands on the staircase, looking down at Claire, a knowing smile playing on his lips. He reveals that he had intended to say that first. He reminds her that he had told her as much during the first banquet. Lord Bulk stands in the background, adjusting his glasses, looking entirely unsurprised by this development. Claire, however, is not just speaking of romance, she is speaking of strategy. She insists that before they tackle the work that remains, and she acknowledges there is much work to be done, she wishes to be with him. She reaches out, taking his hand. Aglia closes his eyes, his smile deepening, and accepts her logic, stating that he understands. Aglia then formally takes the initiative. He holds her hand gently and, with proper solemnity, asks her once again to marry him. Claire's cheeks flush, and she lets out a small sound of surprise. She narrates that the wedding preparations began immediately. With a radiant smile, she accepts, formally addressing him as Your Highness Aglia. However, the blissful atmosphere hits a snag when administrative reality crashes into Claire's expectations. Her eyes widen in genuine shock as she shouts, asking if there is really no marriage contract. Lord Bulk, standing with the composure of a bureaucrat who has seen everything, explains the local customs. For royalty, marriages are recorded on parchment. Claire, frantic, asks about family registers and genealogy for everyone else. Bulk explains that for the royal family, the marriage is witnessed by the people through festivals and public declarations. For nobles and commoners, they simply file for marriage, divorce, and births with the local government. Claire is horrified by the looseness of this system. She argues that even with careful management, simply offering a declaration is too vague and prone to falsehoods. She points out that while this might be acceptable for commoners, for the nobility, it is deeply disturbing. Balk adds that now that paper distribution has started, officials are likely just copying the old wooden forms onto printed paper. He explains that previously, government offices wrote records on pieces of wood, which the state then managed. Claire presses her point with fervor. She envisions a chaotic future, arguing that if bloodlines are not kept clear, it will lead to significant conflict. She asserts that marriage is both a commitment and a contract. This is especially true for nobles, she explains, who possess lands and estates and are responsible for governing them. Her mind is already racing towards legal reform. Aglia watches her, clearly admiring her passion. He comments that it is a good thing Claire is creating a new kind of marriage in this country. He assures her that if she has a suggestion, they can work something out. Claire, however, clarifies that she does not intend to do anything completely new. She is thinking of adapting existing concepts. Claire continues her train of thought, her expression softening as she looks at Aglia. She admits that this is also about him and her. She explains her hope to strengthen the connections between houses and between people. She theorizes that the lack of books in the country may have prevented the spread of technology and knowledge to the common people. She identifies a critical cultural gap. There is no religion in this country, and the royal family is treated as a deity. She reasons that in religious societies, people would swear vows by a god. They would promise to take care of each other and not betray one another. But here, without that religious binding, what rules should they make? She worries that if they make a marriage strictly a contract, it will be difficult to break it off if one party is wronged. She acknowledges the cultural differences that make this difficult. Later, Aglia and Claire are having tea. Aglia notices Claire's distress. She is lost in thought, her brow furrowed. He apologizes for interrupting their tea time but asks if she is okay, advising her not to put too much effort into her worrying. He correctly deduces the source of her anxiety. It is about their marriage. Claire looks at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. She admits that she is indeed having trouble with the marriage contract. She takes a sip of milk tea, finding comfort in its taste even if it has gone cold. She realizes she should consult the people closest to her. Aglia, listening to her concerns, suggests that her story might have given him an idea. He tells her to think about it while she works, but reveals that he plans to visit Lord Balk himself the next day. He encourages her to forget about it for now, drink her tea, and go to bed. The narrative jumps to a meeting between Aglia, Claire, and Lord Balk. Aglia, looking confident, proposes that they just need to simplify the problem. He suggests a uniform style of marriage for everyone, regardless of status, commoner, royalty, or aristocrat. Claire's eyes light up as she realizes the direction he is taking, an all-in-one solution. Aglia brings up the legal systems of the Fatenam Empire, specifically the existence of qualified witnesses for every contract. Claire defines this role, a person who has passed a test to demonstrate an understanding of contract law. Balk, holding a quill, looks intrigued. He asks if Aglia intends to create a law requiring such a person to be present at the signing of marriage or employment contracts. Aglia confirms this is the path they are exploring. The plan expands rapidly. Aglia suggests having every government official in every city take the certification exam. Lord Balk states he has no objections. Claire adds to the proposal, suggesting that the government support the project for 10 years to make it widely known to the public. She also proposes that a guilty party must pay alimony for dissolving an unreasonable marriage. They discuss the economics of the system. A witness fee will be charged when a qualified person is present to sign the contract. However, to ensure fairness, the fee will be adjusted according to the status of the witness, ensuring commoners can pay it without difficulty. Claire volunteers to draft the proposal herself to present to the men. Balk notes that it is a good idea to qualify this role as a side job, and adds that a monthly government allowance would prevent qualified witnesses from quitting. Lord Balk, watching Claire work, expresses his admiration. He attributes the success of this planning to Lady Claire's immense talent. Claire, blushing slightly at the praise, sets a timeline. She will have the underlay draft finished in about a month. After that, they can move on to printing certificates and qualification books. Balk, perhaps relieved that the timeline is feasible, remarks that he thought it would take a year. Claire continues to brainstorm, realizing she needs a name for this credential that will tie everything together. She recalls that in the Empire, there were plenty of reference books. She defines the role, a qualified person who exercises power in the contract. She notes that in this country, the highest rank is royalty. She envisions a system with laws, definitions, and testing standards. She recalls that in Fatenam, the title was Fair Trade Officer. She considers it a bit long and stiff. She thinks about the nature of the title, something that can be conferred on a commoner who can read and write and has the qualifications. She muses that perhaps a peerage title would be nice. She brainstorms keywords, fairness, responsibility, efforts to obtain a title. She scribbles furiously, considering breaking the title down by job description number. She writes down potential names: a stone rule, a responsible baronet. She seems excited by the idea of using a minor noble title like baronet for this civil service role. 3 days later, the scene shifts to the delivery of the draft. Claire, looking manic and sporting heavy eye bags from lack of sleep, presents a massive stack of papers to Lord Bulk. Bulk looks at the stack, intimidated, and asks from where to where the draft extends. He mentally notes that her eye bags are terrible. Claire cheerfully replies, "From the beginning to the end." Lord Bulk, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the text, adjusts his monocle and diplomatically states that reviewing it will take time. Claire looks disappointed, letting out a deflated sound. Bulk smiles gently, suggesting they proceed after he has actually read it. Before Claire can protest or try to work more, her maids intervene. Gwenna and another maid drag Claire away, insisting that she has been working too hard and needs to rest. They tell her that Lord Bulk has plans and she is interrupting, and that she needs to take the day off and not leave her room. Gwenna promises that Lord Bulk will look over it and show it to His Highness. Back in her room, Claire sits in a chair, feeling a wave of self-doubt. She thinks to herself that she is really not a very smart person. She worries that she was interrupting Lord Bulk and that her productivity was just a high from lack of sleep. A maid interrupts her spiraling thoughts, asking about her diet, noting that it must be different here than in her homeland. The maid asks kindly if there is anything specific Claire would like to eat. Claire admits she has never been much of a foodie, though she enjoys the snacks here. However, a specific craving hits her. She asks for pudding. The maid looks confused, wondering what kind of food that is. Claire realizes she hasn't had it in ages. The maid offers to ask the kitchen staff. Claire, realizing the recipe might not exist here, perks up. She offers to write the recipe down immediately because she knows it. She grabs a pen and paper, eager to be useful even in this small way. The maid takes the recipe, smiling, and tells Claire she is like a mother, always filled with love. The maid excuses herself to go to the kitchen, strictly warning Claire not to leave the room for a few minutes. Claire agrees, left alone in the quiet room. She looks out the window, noting that it is a beautiful day. Suddenly, the peace is broken. A strange figure appears in the tree directly outside Claire's window. It is a young man with dark skin and long hair, lounging casually on a branch, eating a piece of fruit. Claire stares at him, baffled, asking internally who that is. The stranger notices her staring. He puts a finger to his lips and asks her not to tell anyone he was there. He introduces himself simply as Gersh, and says, "See you later," before disappearing or signaling his departure. Claire is left stunned, staring at the empty space where the intruder just was. The afternoon light filters through the large window of the royal guest room, illuminating Claire as she sits in a high-backed chair, her attention captured by a figure outside. Perched casually in the tree beyond the glass is a young man with dark skin and long, mysterious black hair, a visual rarity in this country. He introduces himself simply as Gersh before disappearing from view. Moments later, the door to the room opens, and a maid enters, asking if Claire called. Claire, turning her attention back to the interior, mentions the pudding. The maid confirms they can serve it for dinner, her demeanor bright and efficient. Claire offers her thanks, instructing the maid to extend her gratitude to the kitchen staff as well. Alone again, Claire's thoughts drift to the stranger she saw. She deduces he must be a laborer from Nagier, the country known for sericulture, who has recently joined the castle's workforce. She recalls seeing a child with dark hair and brown skin walking in the yard earlier, dressed in an unusual outfit that signaled a strong sense of foreign identity. She resolves to stay quiet about Gersh's name to avoid causing him trouble. Her mind wanders to the concept of sericulture, the cultivation of silkworms, noting that silk production in Valetinier has yet to fully take root. She remembers that her wedding dress is to be commissioned from Nagier's famed belled silk. This sparks a determination in her to learn more about their culture in the future. A memory surfaces, unbidden and sharp. Claire recalls a conversation about kneaded silk, a material she had never seen used in her father's clothes. In the memory, her sister's voice cuts through, dismissive and cruel, declaring that Claire is a very plain girl, regardless of what she wears, implying she cannot match the beauty of the dress. The memory shifts to the present reality, where her maid reassures her that the dress will look great on her. Claire, however, harbors internal doubts, feeling she is not supposed to wear something so grand. The maid interrupts this self-deprecation with a warm cultural anecdote. She explains a custom where a seamstress puts a single stitch into a wedding dress while wishing for the bride's happiness. The maid mimics the action with her fingers, playfully announcing that she, too, will add a stitch to wish Lady Claire happiness. Claire stares at her, stunned, admitting it is the first time she has heard of such a custom. The maid beams, affirming their closeness, leaving Claire to process the overwhelming realization that someone is genuinely wishing for her happiness. Later that night, the atmosphere in the room settles into a quiet calm. The maid notes that Claire has been staying up late frequently and urges her to rest. Claire wonders if she got a little overexcited. The maid prepares the bed, promising to leave the window open to allow a nice breeze to circulate while Claire sleeps. Claire thanks her, and the room goes dark as she drifts off. The peace shatters abruptly. A hand reaches out, shaking Claire awake. She jolts up, startled, to find Gersh standing by her bedside. He apologizes for the fright, explaining nonchalantly that he did not know it was a lady's room. He admits he was slacking off from his menial job because, while it pays well, the work finishes too quickly. Claire, recovering her composure, scolds him, stating that he should never enter a room alone with a lady, regardless of the open window, as it is startling. Internally, she assesses the threat level and decides he does not plan to attack her. She introduces herself haltingly as Claire. Gersh smiles, satisfied that they have formally met. He promises not to intrude again but admits he wanted to ask for her name one last time. Claire wonders if he realizes she is royalty, but he cuts into her thoughts with a cultural explanation. In his country, an open front door or window is an invitation to enter. Claire corrects this misunderstanding, telling him he can use the tree branches outside between morning and early evening if he wishes, but he must not enter. She finds his reserved nature surprisingly likable and decides he does not seem like a bad person. Suddenly, the threat of discovery looms. Claire warns him not to let the ladies-in-waiting find him, as they would treat him as a suspicious person. Gersh shrugs it off, stating he is usually out of the room anyway and just happened to be there today. Seizing the opportunity, Claire asks if he can tell her about his country, Niger. Gersh agrees but demands a promise in return. Claire thanks him, and he adds that he likes the idea of a book, finding it interesting. He expresses a desire to write a book about his country someday. Gersh asks if he should address her as Lady Claire. Claire warns him that due to her higher status, using her name might get him caught. She lays down strict rules. They talk with the window between them, and he must never come inside. She reasons that if he is discovered, he might be less likely to be scolded if he uses her formal title. Gersh agrees to keep his word and tell her about the kingdom of Niger. He adds a final condition: if he sees a maid, he will leave without being seen. Before departing, Gersh offers a secret that cannot be written down in a book. He hands her a small package, stating he just wanted to get her name and give her this item. He bids her goodnight and vanishes into the night. Claire examines the gift, nutritional supplements from Niger. Gersh had noted she looked pale. Claire takes the pills, noting they have a strong smell but a subtle taste. As she settles back into bed, she realizes Gersh spoke beautiful Vietnamese. The core of her body begins to feel warm, the medicine taking effect. The narrative shifts to the following day. A plate of dark, glossy pudding sits on a table, sparkling under the light. Claire takes a bite, marveling at the unusual texture and delicious taste. She asks if it is a dessert from Vietnam. The maid explains it is pudding made with eggs, milk, and sugar. The problem, she notes, is that the ingredients do not last long in Valentinier, which is a hot country. She explains they use groundwater for cooling. Claire is fascinated, contrasting this with Vietnam's use of ice houses to store ice year-round. She expresses a desire to tour the kitchen to see how they work and thank them personally. Later, Claire sits with His Highness Aglia. He brings up the draft she submitted. Claire expresses her happiness at being able to experience these cultural differences in her daily life, acknowledging that there are civilizations the Empire does not possess. Aglia notes that since it is a new system for this country, he wants to hear what the civil servants have to say about it. Claire agrees, suggesting they leave the final details to the civilian staff once the main points are discussed. Aglia reveals he discussed the matter with Lord Balk that day. He tells Claire she will be the first person in the country to write a book about being a living person with knowledge. Claire smiles, admitting she enjoyed both reading and drafting the document. Claire expresses a wish to create more books if allowed. Aglia jokes that her ambitious stories sound like they will happen in 3 days. Claire explains her long-term vision. If learning is established as entertainment, literacy rates will rise, and a publishing business could flourish. She clarifies that while she cannot do it in 3 days, she is happy to take things slowly in this country. Aglia laughs softly, advising her not to stay up all night again. The work on the peerage draft continues. Claire outlines 3 core requirements for a baronet: managing contracts responsibly, proper compliance with the law, and cherishing the connection between people. She emphasizes that this role is important. She identifies these as the minimum requirements for anyone seeking the title. The discussion moves to the practical aspect of the seal. Claire explains that when one receives a peerage, they sign their name and get stamped by the state as proof. She ponders what would be a suitable seal for this purpose. Claire walks down a hallway, deep in thought. She considers the perspective of Aglia and Lord Balk, worrying that a design by them might be seen as cheap or biased because she is too familiar with them. She reasons that since the peerage itself acts as a balance, putting a complex symbol on it might not be right. She decides she needs to familiarize herself with life in this country to find a solution. She aims for a design that even illiterate people can intuitively understand as a balanced contract. She returns to the window, finding Gersh lounging in the tree. She asks if he is done with work. Gersh confirms he is. Claire hesitates, calling him Young La, before correcting herself to Lady Claire. She asks for his advice, promising not to tell anyone about it. Gersh agrees, though he warns her not to mention he helped, as it is too much trouble. Claire explains her dilemma about the seal design. Gersh offers a simple, practical solution. Why don't you just put wheat and rice on that scale? He explains that in this country, wheat and rice are worth the same. Claire's eyes light up. It represents fairness and responsibility at a glance. Gersh elaborates that while the value of wheat has not decreased, the country buys wheat from Valetinier. Conversely, rice exports have increased, leading to more rice farmers and domestic consumption, balancing the profits perfectly. Claire is struck by the elegance of the solution. She thanks Gersh, acknowledging his help was vital. She notes that wheat is still a main ingredient in other countries, despite allergies. Grateful, she asks Gersh if there is anything he wants as a reward. Gersh thinks for a moment. He explains that in his country, they have drinking parties with instruments, songs, and dancing, whereas here, music is only for festivals. He asks for a musical instrument. Claire agrees to look for one. Gersh specifies a lute. Claire recognizes the name from books but admits she has never seen one in person. Gersh describes it as a stringed instrument played with the hands, not with a bow like a violin. Suddenly, a voice calls out, "Lady Claire," from the hallway. A maid is bringing tea. Gersh senses the approach immediately. He promises to dedicate a song to Claire once he gets the instrument, then quickly retreats, saying he has to go. Later, Claire presents her work to Aglia. He welcomes her warmly as the crown princess. Claire explains that she wanted to verify the facts before making it official. She clarifies that it wasn't a lack of trust in Gersh, but due diligence. She confirms she checked the value of wheat and rice with the finance and administration departments. Aglia is pleased with her thoroughness. Claire reports that thanks to her work, the documents are in order. Aglia observes that she seems busy for someone who was supposedly reckless, yet she welcomes him with open arms. He offers to show her around the prepared documents. Claire reiterates the goal: the more people hold these titles, the more contracts are signed. They are using a symbol familiar to the average person: rice and wheat on a balance scale. Gersh was right about their value. Privately, Claire reflects that this symbol will help the country's development. Now, her focus shifts to thanking Gersh. The narrative summarizes the progress. The seal was decided, and with the work of artisans and civil servants, a finished manuscript was ready for His Majesty in 2 months. However, a problem remains. The lute does not appear to be among the items used in the royal palace. Claire admits she has never even heard of it being there. She decides to go to town to buy the thank you gift herself. Standing in the bustling city street, she is amazed by the sights of the shops. Her maids are supportive, noting she has never been out of town except for work. They encourage her to search for the instrument. One maid brings up a practical point: Claire has been getting paid for a few months. She asks if Claire knows anything about her budget. Claire freezes, stammering that she doesn't have any money. The maids look at her, stunned. They inform her that she has enough money to buy not just an instrument, but a whole orchestra. Claire is left speechless, unaware of her own wealth.